when I think about like video game villains from the '90s and like who's the best and all that, one of the few names that come to mind is Sephiroth. Now he may not be the greatest video game villain of all time, but I'm pretty sure he's in a lot of people's top 10 in relation to the '90s. And honestly, he was every bit as popular as Cloud Strife and Tifa Lockhart, who were the main protagonists of Final Fantasy VII. And that game did crazy numbers in terms of sales. I believe it was like the second best selling game on the PS1 behind Gran Turismo. It reached somewhere around like 10 million copies sold worldwide, and it got a remake back in 2020. I'm pretty sure you guys all heard about that. And what you see on the screen is basically a screenshot of Final Fantasy VII the remake. I still want to get that game and actually want to play it because it looks pretty cool. But you look at Sephiroth. He was a way more interesting villain than the likes of Zemus from Final Fantasy IV or X-Death from Final Fantasy V. And the two names I mentioned, they were both I believe they were the main antagonists of their own respective games. Sephiroth had a backstory that was pretty interesting, and I guess like you learn about his past, something that was sealed away from him, and when he learns about his past, he basically begins his descent into madness, and this is after he had once worked as a soldier with Shinra, and I guess his goal ended up becoming he wanted to be a god and rule the earth out of disdain and vengeance against humanity, and I feel like that made for a very interesting story, and even though he was like the main antagonist of Final Fantasy VII, he wasn't really the hardest boss in the game. A lot of people would go on record and say that bosses like Hell House and Ruby Weapon and Emerald Weapon were more difficult than Sephiroth, but I do feel that Sephiroth is a huge name that a lot of people know, even people who have not played Final Fantasy VII, they know about him, and I feel like his popularity is one that has transcended that of video games and all that, and I do feel that there hasn't really been a Final Fantasy villain that's been anywhere close to being as popular as Sephiroth since 1997, and that's something that a lot of people will have varying opinions about. But I do feel like Sephiroth was one of the greatest video game villains of the 90s. I do feel like he was probably he was probably the best video game villain that has ever appeared in the Final Fantasy series. Is he the greatest of all time? Probably not, but it really depends on who you ask. He's way better than other popular video game villains that are kind of overrated, whether it's Bowser from Mario or whether it's Ganon from Zelda or whether it's Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat. Sephiroth was very popular during his time, and over 20 years later, it seems like his popularity has not waned, and a lot of people have unchanged opinions about Sephiroth being one of the greatest video game villains of all time.